welcome to the latest edition of the CEO Story. And this is going to be amazing. I know I say that every time, but this time is a little bit special. We've got Blair Enns, who is the founder of Win Without Pitching. He wrote this amazing book. Obviously, you can see I've bookmarked it everywhere. But then also this second follow-up book, which really just blew my mind. So Blair, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Casey.
And you're traveling all the way from Canada via
I flew
Palm
in for
Springs.
this.
Yeah, so
well, I flew in for Palm Springs.
we appreciate you. We appreciate you. So
Thank you.
do you want to just give us a high level on Win Without Pitching? And then we can kind of break down the 12 proclamations and all the value that, firstly, I got. So I was blown away by this. It really resonated with me so much. I've got so much of it highlighted. It just really moved me. So thank you for putting it all into words, and really, more importantly, simple words, right? Easy to understand. It's not over the top. Like I read some of these legal journals and it's like reading hieroglyphics, but you can consume
It's not a
this
legal journal, that's for sure.
very easily, but tangibly with really good action steps as well. So why don't we share with people a little bit more about that first, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, so Win Without Pitching is the name of my business, and the book is the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. The business is 21 years old now. We're effectively in the sales training for creative professional business. Creative professionals, ad agencies and design firms, other professional services firms that have creative components to what they do. The book came out in 2010, so it's 13 years old now. And it was really me putting my thesis out there into the world on how I think creative services should be sold. And I've had a lot of, so you're not exactly in the target market. As I like to say, the target isn't the market. The target is that at which you aim, and the market is that which you're happy to hit. So I write for the creative professional, a designer or somebody in advertising. But I know while I'm directing my ideas to that person that there are people on the periphery to whom these principles will also apply. So anybody who sells expertise of any kind.
And that's really what I got from it, is that, okay, I knew that coming into it. It's that, hey, we're talking about designs or logos. There's a great example on logos in here with Nike versus Pepsi versus Tropicana. Yeah. I love that one because it's like, holy smokes, that's quite expensive. But is it? So the way you made me reframe and rethink that was genius. And it's kind of like watching a movie and watching the twist at the end. So that really resonated with me a lot. But I just read and consume a lot of information. It's just who I am. And one of the things that I came across you initially in a YouTube video with Chris Doe, who's just down the street.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I actually feel guilty for being here and not popping in on Chris.
But
Maybe
I think he's in Europe right now. He's doing like European
that's right.
tour.
Yeah, that's right.
So don't feel too bad. Yeah. But I saw the way you spoke, engaged, and the message just resonated with me so much that I was like, all right, I'm going to buy all your stuff and I consume it. So even though I'm not the ideal target audience, the point I'm trying to make is that you don't necessarily have to be. You can just take one or two nuggets of information from whatever that is, and it could turn into $1 million idea very easily if executed right. So.
Well, it's interesting. Creative professionals think broadly and expansively, and they're always trying to solve the problem they haven't previously solved before. They don't have a lot of guardrails on their thinking and their ideas. When you get into the finance world, there are a lot of people who are the opposite of that, very rigid in their thinking. And some people can't import an idea from outside of their space, and clearly you can. I think the people who tend to excel are the ones who bring in ideas from other spaces.
Yeah, and we do that in terms of the first proclamation is we will specialize. So it's funny that I learned something from each one of these, but it was, we started our company as togethercfo, which was an outsourced CFO services company. And then through various successes, we help people scale from 5 million a year to 10 million a month in the space of 6 months. Created a huge tax problem for that client, figured out how to save him over $12 million in that first year alone on taxes. And that byproduct then made me realize it's a lot easier to sell tax savings to people because they already understand and know what it is and want it.
Yeah.
Versus CFO services, which is a little bit more gray and intangible and different for everyone. So there's a huge education piece first before you get to work and actually execute. And then on the back end, hope for an upside. Whereas now I can articulate exactly what I do to who the target demographic is. If you pay over $200,000 or more per year in taxes, is there a need or a demand for that in the market? Yes. So as I look at my company's evolution over the last 6-7 years, it ticks off so many of the points that you already talk about, but hearing it and reframing it in a different manner, I'm always learning, right? So specialize. That's the first one. It's like, yes, I specialize. And then please talk to us about this, is conversations over presentations. This is something that blew my mind because, like you said, typical finance, we're in our boxes, we present, we do a scope of work, we send out a contract, all of the things that you kind of talk about in the books. It's kind of flipped and it's like, okay, well, I'm open to trying and figuring new things out, right? Because I'm progressive rather than reactive. How did you come up with that, and how did you then execute it in your business and teach others how to do the same?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I came up with it. So I've written 2 books here, one on selling, the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, and one on pricing creativity, a guide to profit beyond the billable hour. And the pricing book, which is about 5 years old now, to write that book, I had to read the canon of literature on pricing. There's a bunch of science on it, so I had to learn what was already known on the subject and then apply it to the field that I serve, and over time bring some of my original thinking to it. But most of the principles in that book are principles that you can find in other books and other sources on pricing, just coalesced and brought together in one narrative. The manifesto is on selling, and I read no books on selling in preparation for that. Because I know what bad selling looks like. We all know what it looks like. We've all been on the buying side of that, right? We know what it feels like to be a prey caught in a predator salesperson's grasp.
Yeah.
So I just know intuitively that I know what bad selling looks like from being on the buying side, and I know what good selling looks like from being on the selling side. So it was easy for the principles in that book just to flow from what I believe the right way to sell is. And it's interesting. We're all, I say to our clients, you and I and anybody watching this, we're all good conversationalists. We're adult humans. We're in business. We're at least somewhat successful. We don't get to where we are without being good communicators. But something happens to that basic skill of being a conversationalist when the context is sales, when it's money. Some of the basic foundational principles of human interaction seem to get thrown out the window. We quit conversing. We quit being open to two-way communication. We go into brief and present mode. The client starts talking, or the prospective client, we listen only long enough so that we can figure out what we're going to say next, because we feel this pressure to
silence is key here, right?
To be brilliant. Yeah, we feel this pressure to be brilliant, to be always say exactly the right thing at the right time. We build these tools that we lean on too much, these presentation decks, etc. And we go into convince mode, we transmit, we quit receiving. And if we could just unlearn all of that, I don't know where it comes from. If we could just unlearn all of that and be human beings in a conversation once again, we will be so much better and effective salespeople.
It's so funny that you mention that, because although it is like the second proclamation, because I made more sales smoking cigars at my cigar lounge on a Zoom call with people than I do anywhere else. And it's relaxed environment. There's no PowerPoints. There's no like.
You have a Zoom cigar lounge?
My cigar lounge down the street in Beverly Hills at the Grand Havana Room. There's a patio area. There's always sun shining in Beverly Hills, right? So I'll be smoking a cigar, we'll jump on a call with someone, and whether I'm being sold to or doing the sell in, I'll make decisions because I'm in a relaxed environment, and that's the energy I then give off to the person. So they're like, oh, I wish I could just smoke a cigar at 2:00 in the afternoon and hang out with my buddies. I'm like, well, I'm working right now, right? But it breaks the ice. But the comfort environment of not being in a stuffy office or in a corporate building and all suited and tied up, and I've done that for a lot of years, and that's how many businesses still operate. But I think you build a much deeper conversation if it isn't in that formal corporate environment. And you do have a better conversation if it isn't hidden behind a PowerPoint. So one of my close friends is Rene Rodriguez, who's a speaking coach. And just the setup that we talked about earlier in my office, where I've got a teleprompter set up so I can look into the camera directly. So I'm making that eye contact, and even to the point at which taking off my glasses so people can see the expressions and the micro expressions on my face is so key to building a deeper connection at a psychological level and a neuro-linguistic level. But it all comes back to, we're just two people having a conversation. I don't want to hide behind books or TVs or a screen. I want to be as human as possible so you can see what I'm trying to articulate, and then we'll get into how to articulate that in a second. But a conversation over presentations it's been a game changer for us because we're finance, right? We're saving people money on taxes. We're hiding behind, oh, well, if we put these 3 numbers in on this spreadsheet, we can save you this much money over here. Whereas I could do that in the background and still be looking at you directly in the eye as I'm delivering that same nugget of information.
Yeah.
And that's what we've switched to, and I'm training my team to do exactly the same thing. Is don't worry so much about that mechanism, because it's not about looking at a flashy app or an Excel sheet or a PowerPoint or whatever the mechanism is. It's about the way and the conviction in which you're delivering. And we're going to get into this in a second, but the same one, the next one was diagnose before prescribing. And I love that because everybody jumps straight to the solution. We were just talking about EOS a minute ago. But talk to us about that. What are some of the common problems you see with people not really understanding what they're trying to solve and just going straight in for, hey, do the logo or whatever the creative is this way, without that initial context?
I think there's a fundamental misconception in creative services professions and others that if you are in the service business, that if you sell a service or you deliver your expertise through services, then you are in the service business, and the service sector mantra that the customer is always right applies to you. When in reality, anytime you're selling some form of expertise, a better starting point is the assumption that the customer is wrong, not because our clients are idiots, but because they're inside the jar. They can't read the label. They don't have the removed third-party perspective. They haven't seen multiple cases like theirs before. So when a client comes to us and says, I need X, we should see ourselves as having a professional obligation to diagnose that, to validate that self-diagnosis. And the story I like to tell is, I live in a small town in the middle of nowhere in Canada, and one day I called up my auto mechanic and I said, hey, Ken, my rear brake drums are out of round. And he said, okay, well, pick up the parts and bring them in, I'll replace them. So I bought the parts, I brought them in.
Are you a handy mechanic?
No, I know nothing about
You were just
cars.
guessing? Or?
No. It turns out I drive away, I still had the same problem. I had this vibration in the rear end. I go back to the mechanic and I say, well, I still have the same problem. He puts it up on the hoist and he says, oh, your rear brake drums. He said it was like a joint. It was a joint of some kind,
Bushing,
a U joint or something.
Okay.
I don't remember. I don't know anything about mechanics. My brother-in-law knows something about cars, and I said to him, hey, I've got this problem when I'm going down a hill. I get this vibration in the rear end. He said, are you braking? I said, maybe. He said, it sounds like your rear brake drums are out of round. I said, I thought...
Sounds cool.
Yeah, I don't even know what it means. But because I went to the expert, the mechanic, who's a real man, not somebody who types for a living, and I didn't want to appear like I didn't know what I was doing. So I showed up and said, yeah, I can't, Blair here. My rear brake drums are out of round. It sounds like I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
right?
that's the part you saw, yeah?
I convinced him. So I tell this story and I say to people, so I spent hundreds of dollars I didn't need to spend. Whose fault was it? And everybody says, it's your fault, Blair. And I say, it's not my fault. It's his fault. If he's a professional, then he should see himself as having a professional obligation to validate my self-diagnosis before he operates on me. Because if he were my surgeon, if he were my cardiac surgeon and I went into his office and said, I have this pain in my chest. I think I need quadruple bypass surgery. And he said, okay, lie down. I'll catch you open. There's a word for that. It's called malpractice.
Okay, yeah.
Right? That surgeon has an obligation, even if I think I know what my problem is, to validate that diagnosis. Now, if the surgeon sees himself as in the service business, where the customer is always right, and he says to himself, well, it's probably just angina, but you're the customer. If you want quadruple bypass surgery, I'm going to give it to you. That, again, that's the definition of malpractice. So for all of us who sell expertise, but maybe we think of ourselves as professionals, but we're not in the classic professions, I think we need to remember, if we want to be seen as professionals, we need to take seriously the professional obligation to diagnose before we prescribe. And when a client comes to us self-diagnosed, we have an obligation to validate that diagnosis.
I really, really love that. And the reason so is we used to just go straight into our trust structure, which is several hundred thousands of dollars. So we're going from super cold to warm to now we're married and you're locked in at a really high price, to creating what we call a tax savings roadmap. So the roadmap is that diagnosis.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we're on a call. Now it doesn't need to be a super fancy presentation or Zoom or jumping through all these hoops. It's just, what is your pain point? What are you looking for? And can we help you? Or we'll refer you to someone that can better help you. So
the roadmap is the map of the engagement to follow. The first steps on the engagement tend to be the diagnostic steps, where you're understanding the client's situation.
So that would be, in our case, like a 15 to 25 minute call, just to see if we're a good fit. And if we can't add value, or we don't think it's a good fit for us, because again, the minimum engagement with us is 200,000 or more in tax liability. Yeah. So that's less than 1% of the population, right? It's only high net worth people that even qualify. But if you manage to get us on a call, we still want to be able to point you in the right direction so we're not wasting each other's time, right? So the way we do it is a quick call, and on that call, by the end of it, we'll know whether we can hit a home run or not. And if we can, then it's the next step of, we need this information to perform this type of review, and that's a paid review.
Right.
Like, but
a paid diagnostic.
Yeah, one of your other points is don't do it for free, right? Don't offer the solution for free. And I love that, because it's like, oh my goodness, everything that we kind of implemented and put in, and this was only recently we started doing this. We were doing all that stuff for free ahead of time, like previously. We were doing, send us your financials, send us your tax returns, we'll run an analysis, still not to get the business. And now we've spent tens of hours reviewing all of this stuff, sending proposals, like the full works. We even got a huge data room of information that nobody reads. But now we just switched that around. So on the front end, it's like, are you in pain? What is the actual problem? Can we help with it? If so, this is the first step of the relationship. We're dating before we get married, so to speak. So I loved reading that part of the book. And then the question for you is, what does it mean to sell? Because people often get confused with that, the way it's written as well.
Yeah, I'm fond of saying, and I say it in the book, I think in your job, in your role as salesperson, whether you're a dedicated salesperson or you're the principal in the business or the subject matter expert who will be delivering the expertise, in your role as salesperson, it's not your job to talk people into hiring you. And it seems counterintuitive. I really believe that if you've got, so you've followed the first proclamation, you have a specialized practice, you have a very clear idea of who you can help and how. You're discerning, these people aren't a good fit for us. When you find somebody in that target market, you're simply looking for the next right fit client.
Yep.
And if there's not a fit on both sides of the table, there's no point in you trying to talk them into hiring you. In fact, my clients are often asked by their prospective clients, why should we hire you? And I always say, refuse the invitation to answer that question. I think a good response to why you should hire me is, well, it's not my job to convince you to hire me, but why don't I explain to you why most of our clients hire us? And you can decide if those reasons are also your reasons. I think when you're selling expertise, the sale is the sample of the engagement to follow. And you should see the sale as kind of a coachable moment, as a moment where you demonstrate to the client before you're hired how you are going to show up in the engagement, the role you will play in the engagement. And if you think it's your job to push your clients around and tell them exactly what they need to do without any options, instead of laying out the options and the trade-offs and allowing them to make a decision, then I guess it's appropriate for you to sell that way. But I don't think that's how any of us really want to deliver our expertise. We want to make the case. We want to have the facts and the data on our side for the case. We want to lay out the trade-offs in the decision that we're giving the client to make. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And then respect the fact that the decisions are theirs.
I always end in a 3-part statement. It's like, now we've had a discussion and we've kind of been through that we can add value. At the end of it, it's like, now you have one of 3 decisions to make. 1 is to do nothing. 2 is to take what I've given you and try and do it yourself. Or 3 is to engage with us and have us do it for you. So they know they can pick 1, 2, or 3. And whether they do something or not, it's still a decision. It's just a decision not to act.
Yeah. So it's a great framing of their options. And, who wants a pushy salesperson? Who wants to be advised in the engagement itself by somebody who's pushy? I don't think any of us want that. So no. That's a respectful way to lay out the options to a prospective client in the sale. And I think you're sending all of the right signals that way.
Yeah, it works for us ultimately because we've already done this work, and what we're dealing with is so intimate with financials and the actual numbers. Like, creative's cool and great and it looks amazing, but when someone's giving you their tax return and you're analyzing it, there's no hiding from that unless you got a good structure. We'll get into that later on. But okay, words over paper is the next point that I wrote down. What's your meaning behind that?
So I'm fond of saying there's an inverse correlation between the value of your thinking and the amount of paper it takes you to communicate it. So here's what I mean by that. So you have a diagnostic phase of the engagement where you get paid to go get the information that you need to make a decision on your ability to help, the impact, and the strategy that you'll employ. And my clients often do as well. So they have a paid engagement, paid diagnostic phase. They sift through the information. Creative people are more kind of divergent thinkers, so they have less of a codified process for sifting through the information typically, but they sift through the information and they arrive at findings and recommendations. All right, here's what we found, here's what we think we should do. And that is the deliverable in a diagnostic phase in the engagement. And if you do this enough, if you work with the same types of clients often enough, you'll see the patterns very quickly, and it will become obvious to you. Oh, I've seen this before. I know what your situation is. I know what you should do. Now it's incumbent on you to just explain that to the client. In that moment, when it's time to explain this to the client, some of my clients get nervous and they start writing detailed reports.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because they're unsure. They feel naked showing up in a meeting and saying, here's what we found, here's what we need, what we think you should do. They want to support it with a big report, with a big deck. So they build these presentation tools and these reports and these documents. And as they type, the profitability of that diagnostic phase erodes. and they end up over-delivering on the deliverable, just so they're trying to build some sort of case, some sort of proof.
Is that to build significance or just because of self-doubt?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. It's like, here's what we think we should do. Well, I paid you $20,000 for that, a sentence. Effectively, yes, they have. But the salesperson in that moment, the professional, feels like, well, I need something more. I need something to back. I need a big thing to drop on the desk to merit the $20,000 or whatever they charge for the diagnostic. So I'm simply saying with that proclamation, let's just recognize that the value that we're delivering is very often in the advice itself, and we don't need to. There are some cases where that's not the truth. It wouldn't apply, where you might have some legal requirement to produce some documents, et cetera, and perhaps in your field that is the case. But generally speaking, if we're getting paid for advice, we can just give the advice and we can summarize that advice on a single page of paper rather than a 20-page report.
Yeah, well, the way that we do the diagnosis, and again, it's really new, but it's the same information that we were doing for free, it's worth at least $25,000, because I know legal firms and other tax firms that charge that much to do it. And I kind of go against one of the further acclamations as charge more, because I want to show more value on the front end, and then I'll charge more if we engage on the back end. So it's kind of a little bit of a skewed version of that, but still, compared to doing it for free, at least we're covering overhead, and then we'll make our money if we engage fully. So I've got my own little spin on that, but in terms of the way we are delivering it, it is in a Word document or a PDF document that we're sending to the client ahead of time. And most people would have just stopped there, but we're actually then doing a presentation, whether it's in person or on Zoom, to go over all of those items, to simplify it and to help them understand it. It is written in very simple layman's speak, but in order to help them understand the value of the recommendation section at the end, because at that point, they'll already know they're a good fit to move forward with us. We've then transmitted that in a conversation form, if we're using the terminology here, rather than just a physical presentation.
Some people want to read the report. Some people,
which is why we do both,
will say, okay, thanks for the report. Tell me, what do I do? I have a friend who many years ago, he was running a small creative agency, and he had a large retail client who brought him into her office, and she dropped these 2 telephone book-sized reports on her desk, and she said, we paid Bain and Company $1.2 million to write these reports. If I give you $50,000, will you read them and tell me what to do? And I thought, that's brilliant. That is just brilliant. Here's the report. So $1.2 million, you'd better produce a substantial report. But at the end of the day, she didn't know what to do with it.
It's too much information.
So they read it, and they came back in with big 4x8 sheets of foam core with images mounted on, and conveyed their message of what they thought the takeaways should be, how they should implement the recommendations in the report.
I would have made Bain do that rather than pay someone else $50K to do it. Like, I'm paying you $1.2 million. You're going to throw in a dummy's guide to this dossier.
Yeah. What's an extra $50,000?
Yeah, I suppose. It's a rounding error at that point, right? Okay. So you've got an equation in the book, and I thought it was really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's wrong, but go ahead.
It's wrong. Okay, well, let's talk about that then. So it's value equals quality over price.
Yeah.
So why is it wrong? And why did you initially write it? And what's evolved since then?
So, because I didn't actually know anything about value, and on the surface that would appear to be correct, but how do you quantify quality? In my next book, Pricing Creativity, I really got into this subject of value. I went down the value rabbit hole.
Which is why I resonated so much with that, because our pricing model, it's not a cookie cutter H&R Block type tax return that we're doing.
Yeah.
It's something very comprehensive. There's many layers. So I needed to think outside the box, and it's like, how can I price this fairly where it's a win-win for both the client and myself, and this is the solution that, like, we had a lot of it down, but it helped me language, pre-frame, and kind of smooth out the rough edges considerably.
Yeah, my formula for value 13, 14 years ago when I wrote that book was a function, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was a function of the labor theory of value, which was the reigning theory of value for hundreds of years, which said that you measure the value of something by the cost of the inputs. But that equation doesn't account for profit. It doesn't account for excess value creation, which is effectively profit comes out of excess value creation. The subjective theory of value is the dominant theory of value today. It effectively says that value, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. Value or values of any kind do not exist extrinsically in the world. They are all a property of the observer.
Well, we can just use Art Basel as an example of that, where you've got a ripe banana taped to a frame that sells for millions of dollars. And in some crazy person's eye, that's worth millions of dollars. And to other people's, what the hell are you spending millions of dollars on a banana for?
We all value different things differently at different times. Like we even ourselves value, like we value water differently when we're washing our car or our dog, as opposed to when we're hiking through the desert. So what we're willing to pay for water in different contexts would be like multiples of what we would pay for it in other contexts. Okay. And then other people would pay different prices. So at the end of the day, value really, it's not our job to ascribe value to something. It's our job to determine the value that the client in this case would extract from something. Now, in your business in particular, and in a lot of my clients' businesses, most of the value that you create is economic, but there's a saying, at the end of the day, value is nothing more than a feeling. It's not about the price, it's not about the money, it's about how you feel about the price. It's about how you feel about the money. Value is just a sense of regard. So we don't all value $100,000 the same, do we? We don't value a dollar the same. We don't value a dollar the same.
And I can give you an example of
that.
Like, I was at dinner last night and went smoked some cigars afterwards. One of the guys I was speaking with regularly drinks $10,000 to $20,000 bottles of wine. So one bottle of wine is $10,000. So I would look at that, I would be like, holy shit, what type of wine is this? But that's just a regular bottle at his level, what he consumes. And it's like, all right, he values that so much more than myself. I like wine, don't get me wrong, but I'm not drinking Petrus every night. It's different levels of the same thing, right?
Yeah, and it's tied to willingness to pay. So, somebody's willing to pay $10,000 to $20,000.
Well, he's a billionaire, so it is just a rounding error for him. Yeah. So he doesn't even look at the price. He's like, oh, I like that. That's what I want. That's what I'll get. But it's back to the desert analogy. It's like if you're thirsty in a desert and you want some water, it's worth a hell of a lot more than if you're in Antarctica and you're surrounded by it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the value equation then changed in this book. What did you learn differently? Because like you said, you did a lot more research when you were doing the pricing creativity. And how, like, the example that comes to my mind is the Nike versus Pepsi, the Nike, we're in America, right? Versus Pepsi versus Tropicana. It's like the $1 million logo. Is it cheap? Is it expensive? I won't give it away. You've got to read the book for that. But it's a great example of perception. And we're on the high side of price, but we're on the extremely high side of value. So I would argue it's a no-brainer for the right type of person. And I think that's the underlying point of what you're trying to transmit, right? But I know you mentioned 3 different people in the back of the manifesto. What were the key drivers in the research for the pricing creativity and figuring that out? Because it fascinated me in terms of there's no hard and set rule for people selling services. Do you go off, hey, well, this guy's doing it for $100, so I should do it for $100? Or it's so many different variables. Like, how did you figure all that out?
Well, I think the key impetus for the moment when I decided that I didn't know enough about value and pricing and therefore needed to learn about it was I had a guy who was he was an owner of an ad agency, and he had come to a couple of seminars, he'd bought a few things from us, maybe totaling less than $10,000. And one day I was on the phone with him, and he was buying an ongoing program that we were delivering at the time.
Do you still do events and ongoing seminars and things, or is it mainly?
Yeah, it's a little bit different now, but we do workshops. You can find them at winwithoutpitching.com. We do a lot of private training, deep private engagements now.
And is that one-on-one, or is that in group?
It's one-on-one.
Okay.
Yeah. The workshops are in group. So I'm onboarding this guy into this program, and I'm getting some basic information, and he says, I need to thank you. I've made a lot of money from your advice over the years. And I said, oh, that's great. Thanks. And he said, no, I've made a lot of money from your advice. And I said, oh, that's great. He said, Blair, I have personally made millions of dollars from following your advice. He just wanted to be sure that I was clear. And in that moment, I had mixed feelings. And I write about this in the book. First, I thought, well, okay, he's giving me too much credit because I've given lots of people this advice over the years, and not everybody's made millions. But I was predominantly struck by the feeling of, I totaled up how much money he'd paid me over the years, and it was less than $10,000. And my reaction was, well, that isn't fair.
I need to charge more.
And then
which is one of the proclamations.
Part of me thought, well,
right? Yeah.
It's not unfair. This is my fault for not pricing more in line with the value that we're creating. So I thought, okay, I need to learn more about value and pricing. So I ordered a whole bunch of books, and I thought I'll read 2 or 3 books and learn what I didn't know. And by the end of the first chapter of the first book, which was Ron Baker's book, I think it's Pricing on Purpose. Okay. And I was thinking about this chapter the other day. It's why is movie theater popcorn so expensive? I was in a movie theater for the first time in 3 years, eating $20 popcorn.
Oh yeah.
Laughing, thinking about this. It's not what you think it is. It's not because it's a captive market. The popcorn is basically, the expensive popcorn is segmenting the market into these different segments, and it's actually subsidizing the people. It's allowing people who don't buy popcorn to see the movie cheaper. So he explains it in better detail than that. But so I read this book and I realize this is actually a massive field, the field of value, let alone pricing and the science that goes into pricing. It's a massive field. So I spent years reading. I read pretty much the whole canon of literature on pricing, and then started to give that advice to my clients, and somebody suggested I should write a book on it. So there it is.
Fantastic. And one of the ways I frame that, because everyone's at a different threshold, I make it really simple. I'm like, if I was to save you $100, how much of that would you give me for saving you $100? What is that worth to you if I was to do that for you? So you can answer that. What do you think a fair price is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is going to differ from person to person. Like, you would think there would be a universal response to that. Of course there isn't. I've asked similar versions of that question to all kinds of people, and I've seen some patterns. Like in my world, people who run public relations firms would say something like, well, I'd give you $5. I'd give you 5 of those $100. Okay. Other people would say, well, if you can save me $100 a year, I would give you the first year, I would give you $100. So the answer really is personal.
And there's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's just everything is a negotiation, right?
Yeah.
And with one person, I might take $5 if I see future value in a different area, or it's a relationship. As an example, we've been doing a lot of business with influencers. So maybe I'd take $5 from an influencer if I know he's going to bring me 100 clients. Or maybe I'll just take the $100 from the guy who's got no wider reach and be on my way, right? So again, there's no right or wrong, which is why I really like this, because it helped me re-articulate and reframe things in my mind and how I can provide a win-win. And you mentioned it in the manifesto, is it's not so much the price or the value, it's how do they feel about it? And at the end of that conversation, are they excited to cut me a 6 or a 7 figure check, because they know that they're going to save tenfold, or they're going to have asset protection or tax-free wealth, whatever the benefits are, but they know that they've invested in their legacy ultimately.
I think that open-ended question that you ask, if I could save you $100, how much of that would you give to me? Mm-hmm. It's better being asked as a closed-ended question. Mm-hmm. I think you bring what you think is your fair share of value to the table, and you say, if I could save you $100, would you give me $20, whatever the math is, $50? Another way to phrase it is, if you gave me $1 and I gave you $2 back, is that a fair deal? Would you take that deal? Does that's more
reframing,
like it's more on revenue gains rather than cost reductions, and you're working in the cost reduction space.
But we could factor that in, because one of the things that we used to do is say, hey, we know your revenue, we know your margins, and we know how much you pay in tax. And we reverse engineered it to say, okay, if we saved you this much in tax, it's the equivalent of adding this much in revenue in your business.
Yeah, it's a great way to frame it. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, would you like to add 10% just by creating a structure rather than using loopholes? Oh, well, when you frame it like that, it's like, because they can tangibly understand what growing the business 10% feels like, because it's hiring, it's marketing, it's all of that. But you're doing it with a signature.
Yeah. And how hard it is to grow a business 10% under some circumstances.
And that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that I think most people know the struggle of going from a startup to a business to a thriving business before it starts declining.
And the plateau where you get stuck and you come along and say, well, I'll get you unstuck. Just sign here. It's done.
Yeah.
It's a pretty strong value proposition.
We test and we kind of figure out the best way to deliver it, but we've tried variations of all that. But again, back to the book, it really helped me re-energize and reignite better frames and better ways to articulate tough conversations. Because another one of the things I wrote down here was deal with money early.
Yeah.
Because in working with us is a huge investment. It's a multi-generational investment, but it's a big damn investment. So we get that out the way with super early. So definitely reading that in the manifesto ties in with the diagnosis, because now we know the financial situation. We know if you can afford us or not. We know if we add value or not. And then if we don't, we just refund you. We're not even going to charge you for it, because we believe in what we do. And we're not here just to take money off people that are borderline or not a great fit, because that's in line with our integrity as well. So can you talk to us a little bit about dealing with money early and what problems you see a lot of people communicating in that aspect?
Yeah, stress is caused by the things you don't do. Mm-hmm. So, or sometimes the things out of your control. But really, most of the stress in our lives is caused by these things that are bothering us that we haven't resolved, that we haven't taken action on. So for a lot of people, money conversations are stressful. Well, they're stressful because we're avoiding them. So it's a good muscle to build, this habit of getting to the money part of the conversation early. So if you have a minimum level of engagement, as an example, tax liability of $200,000, that's a good place to start. The minimum fee, it's good. It's not a necessity, but it's a good place to start. Just whatever. I sometimes imagine the price is a live grenade that you're holding, and my metaphor breaks down pretty quickly, but you need to get rid of this thing quickly.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the meeting holding on to this thing forever. You need to get rid of it. It's going to go off, and it's causing you some stress the longer you hold on to it. So build this reflexive habit, this muscle of just getting to the money part of the conversation as soon as you can, and then
so how do you
learn
open that? So we do this pretty well in terms of linking ourselves to like a Rolls Royce, a private jet, an Amex Black Card. People know they exist, they know they're expensive, but they see the value in it. Even though you could get a Prius, you could ride a car rather than a jet. There's many other ways to do it, but the experience and the value is deemed different. But more importantly, we disqualify more people with our outreach than anything else, because we're only going after the top 1%. So it's like, if you're not making over, or if you're not paying over 200K in taxes per year, then there's better alternatives out there than us. We can point you in the right direction. We've got a community that you can come hang out in and find them as well. But it's not us. But if you are, then instantly you're more tuned from the beginning as well. So back to what we said with being more selective and being it, well, actually we didn't get to it yet, but being more selective and being willing to walk away from not the right fit, I think ties in really well with this as well. So what are some good ways to phrase dealing with money sooner?
Yeah, again, I think minimum level of engagements. So if you find yourself in a lot of sales conversations with people who aren't good fits, it's probably a good idea to put a minimum threshold on your website. And that's if you spend too much time qualifying people out, just place the hurdle that they need to clear on your website. So there's that's an easy way to talk about money early.
I'm smiling here because we've just redesigned our website, and on our tax savings roadmap page, the first thing it says, and not the first thing, but the first thing is what it is, the tax savings roadmap. The subheading right underneath it is, if you pay over $200,000 a year or in taxes or more, then you apply now.
Gotcha.
So
yeah, that's great.
Instantly, right in your face. If you are not a good fit for this, don't even bother reading it. We don't want to waste your time. You don't need to waste our time. And be on with the next one, right?
And there's a lot of, what economists call signaling in price. There's a lot of information that is wrapped up in a price, including positioning. So when you say that it's a high price threshold to clear to work with us, that's people who are on the cusp want to qualify. And people just below the cusp will try to convince you that you should take them on as a client.
On a daily basis, yeah.
Yeah, and people who can just barely clear the threshold are proud of the fact that they qualify, and they love to be able to say to their friends, "Oh, I use this guy. You got to have a minimum tax liability of $200,000."
Subtle flex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We have that in EO and YPO and these like groups that I'm part of, where EO has an accelerator version where I think EO's threshold right now is $1 million a year in revenue, but below that, if you're not quite there, there's an accelerator program. I think it's 250 or above. YPO is the next level above that, where it's I think 15 million and above. Then there's another group above that, which is Tiger 21, which is 20 million plus. So I see that all the time in terms of when you're hanging out with different groups of people. They like to also mention what other groups they're part of and things. And
there's always a next level. Right?
Always. Tony Robbins does this really well.
Yeah, he does.
So when you go to UPW, you can get in the room for $300. He's going to sell you on the health, wealth, business, mastery, the next level up, which is 10 grand or so. Then there's the platinum partners at 75 grand. Then that got too big. So now he does the Lion group at 150K. So it just keeps going. And then there's the one-on-one personal engagements at $4 million for a day. So the value keeps going up the closer you get to Tony. And I love it personally because
you get to the next level and then you find, there's a level beyond.
It's like that
the secret
video
levels.
Game, and it's
You're
a secret
levels.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I like that too. So we touched on it slightly there. It was like, be selective and pursue perfect fits. I think we do a good job of this, but most people probably don't. Depending on the stages of the business, if you're at the early stages, I made this mistake all too many times when I was doing CFO services, because I would pitch to anyone, I would take anyone as a client because I knew I could understand the numbers and diagnose the numbers. But if everyone's your client, no one's your client, right? So I really resonated with that point. Can you share a little bit more about how to figure out who your perfect fit is?
So we tend to think, so if we think of a career as opposed to a business, in our career we want breadth early, We want to do a whole bunch of different things, and then we want to kind of specialize a little bit late. But as soon as we launch a business, our intuition says to broaden out our market, to go after the largest total addressable market. The problem with that is we're also increasing the number of competitors. And if we can niche down and say, I'm going to concentrate on helping this very tight group of people solve a tight selection of problems, then we can lead with a very specific value proposition. And the beauty of that, Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1,
great book.
It might be the best, like, fundamental business book, like just a grounding on how to start a business, where he basically says, pick a niche, dominate the niche, and then pursue kind of concentric circles around that niche. And there are other ways that, like, your niche clients will say to you, hey, you help me solve this very specific problem. Do you also do this? Can you help me solve this tangential problem?
Because they've got trust and then relationship and then track record at that point.
So
right?
your business, the pressures of the business will actually be to grow, to expand your niche.
Yes, concentric.
You'll be dragged outside of your niche all the time. And I'm fond of saying you can take that work, that other work. You can actually use your current clients as a way to expand your offering. And then you can expand your value proposition if it makes sense to do so. But you can also take work that's outside of your area of specialization, outside of your declared focus. What you don't do is go change the language on your website now. Like, here's an example. So you take a design firm, and I say to my design firm clients, let's say somebody calls you up. It's 12 o'clock, you're about to go for lunch. Somebody calls you up and says, hey, do you guys wash cars? And you reply, no, we're a design firm. And the guy says, I got $10,000 for somebody to wash my car. You sure you don't want to wash my car? What's the answer? I say, the answer is, well, I'm on my lunch break. I'll see you in 10 minutes. And you take the 10 grand and you wash the car. What you don't do is broaden out the language on your website to say, we're now in the design and car wash business. Mm-hmm. Right? It's okay to take that work outside of your area of specialization, but it's actually the specialization and that being selective around making sure that this next client is somebody that that will kind of build your reputation and build your integrity. That's another muscle that you want to develop. I think you should, this is a new thought for me, I think you should think about it this way. Whether you're collecting data on your clients' businesses or not, or your client's situation, and rolling up that data to make predictive decisions or not, and you clearly are, but even if you're not, you should imagine that you are. And you're going to take this one oddball client for an oddball engagement and ask yourself, what is that going to do to the data? Is it going to just disrupt all of the, it's going to be this outlier in the data that's going to throw everything off or not? That's how you make those decisions. And that, again, the caveat, from time to time, you take these things because you have the capacity. It's a whole bunch of money. You don't have to compete for it. It's a no-brainer. You know you can do it. And what you don't do is like reshape the business around that because of one client.
Don't reshape your identity for a
yeah.
insignificant percentage of revenue.
Yeah, you
or
got
a
it.
one-off type revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense to me. And the example that I kind of comes to mind with me in that specific scenario was CFO services. Like, we started off as a CFO services company, helping all sorts of entrepreneurs scale their companies. And now we morphed, we morphed into a tax saving specialist firm that only deals with high net worth individuals all the way up to family offices. It's a huge pivot and huge difference. And our website did change when I made that decision to, okay, now the whole page isn't about CFO services, but one page still is, because we still offer that as a service. But that's a small section. And now the majority of it is all tax savings, language, verbiage, services, to a point at which we've just redesigned and we've removed the CFO services. So over our evolution of time, it was figuring out what we really do, who we serve, and how we add the most value. And then dealing with the money, paying the right price. And one of the things that I wrote down is, don't solve the problem until you get paid, but adding value and charging the right amount. It kind of goes into what we were talking about with value, but figuring out what your identity is as well helps a lot in that regard, because at the beginning we were just a CFO services firm. No one even understands what CFO services are. It's different to everybody. And through the struggle and the pain of figuring that out the hard way, because I'm not a marketer, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a finance guy at heart. I had to figure all this stuff out just the same way you're researching all these books and taking a nugget and putting together and creating your own thesis on it. The way I figured it out was I didn't want to educate people. If I'm asking 100 people in the audience, what does CFO services mean to you? And I'm getting 50, 60 different answers. That means I've got to do so much more pre-framing and education to get everyone up to the same level before I can then insert, well, the benefits of that are this, 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 and this. Whereas on the flip side...
if you look at the difference, just another obvious thing, CFO services is a deliverable. Tax savings is an outcome. People, when they buy a service, they're really looking for an outcome. If you can frame what it is they're buying as the outcome, and I know these are two different things. Anybody watching, if you're launching a new business and you pick your specialty, your discipline, and your market, you will find that through the nature of specializing, other doors will open to you, and the tax savings door opened and you walked through that door, and it might not be the last door you walk through.
Well, pivoting back to what we talked about, it's not, and I always get approached about family offices. The next vertical along is, hey, you do such a good job on tax savings. Why don't you tell me what to do with my money and be my wealth advisor? Well, I'm sorry, I don't issue any financial advice. Oh, well, I need some insurance. Why don't you become my insurance broker too? I'm sorry, I'm not an insurance broker. I understand it very well at a high level because I'm set up that way. And I encourage my clients to look at what I'm doing and do the same thing or something similar that fits them. But it doesn't mean that I want to be the specialist in all those areas, and nor could I ever be. But the next evolution just naturally makes sense for us to go from the top 1% in the world at tax savings to a family office. But like you said, I'm then competing with all of these multifamily offices. And I don't want to, I'm swimming with sharks, and I'm a little fish at that point. I'd rather be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond.
I think it's not enough people understand the power of dominating a small niche, especially yours is horizontal, so your niche is defined by the need. Like in most of my clients are business to business. They're selling to other businesses, and if you're selling to other businesses and you can specialize in a vertical, in an industry, all those people talk to each other. But, high net worth individuals at a certain level within a certain geography tend to talk to each other.
Golf country club would be the simple place. Yacht clubs.
I'll bet you also find that some of your clients, let's say they're in tech, will refer their friends who are also in tech. So you'll get this spurt of referrals within vertical industries.
It's exactly that same thing happened. We helped one really big influencer in the Bitcoin space. His whole audience is in a similar frame of mind, whether it's Bitcoin, Web3, and then just a knock-on consequence of people that also come in know that person or associate to him or speak on the same stages or have a similar reach to him. And they're, oh, you're this person's guy. I'm like, yep. All right, well, now you're my guy too. And it just perpetuates you down that vertical. But we're lucky because everyone pays taxes. 90% of people pay too much in taxes. Only 1% qualify to work with us. So we're in a good situation where there's more and more millionaires being made every day, especially as they keep printing all this fake money. Different podcast for that one. But the target market is growing. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. When you specialize and get really niche, one of the stories that resonated with me was there was a story of a guy who was creating a course, and similar to Hamosi, and he talks about, hey, I'm creating a general course for losing weight. Okay, well, everyone wants to lose weight. I'm going to create the course generally for everyone. But if you create that same course and that same content specifically for tech CEOs that are working too hard in their office, they're looking at the screen too much, 5 exercises you can do behind your desk. It then becomes something...
Or new moms who need to lose the baby fat or whatever it is. Or just premenstrual women, whatever. Yeah, pick a category. They're going to
pay 10x more.
Yeah.
Because when they read that messaging, it's like, holy shit, I'm a mom, prenatal, that's exactly me. Versus I can go to any bookstore and find millions of books on that generic topic, right? So when that penny dropped in my head, I was like,
yeah, Hormozy's a genius, isn't he?
I love the way, again, similar to yourself, the way he articulates things in a fashion that a 5-year-old can understand. Normally people try and sound a lot smarter than they are just to give them that ego boost. But I find simplicity is actually your friend in most circumstances. And because what we do is really complex, like talking about paragraphs of tax code and how things integrate and lock. Nobody really cares, to be perfectly honest. I don't care half the time, but I love the outcome. You phrased it really nice. So if I can get you to this outcome where you're saving millions of dollars a year on taxes, or at least hundreds of thousands a year on taxes, then you're going to trust me, right, at that point. And it's our job to build that trust and articulate it in a way that doesn't make the person switch off. Because I've done it a million times. When you see the person's eyes glaze over and they're like,
are you going to save me more money or what? Yeah. Okay, great. Let's go.
That's pretty much it. How do we get to the goal even quicker? So let's end with a quick summary of the pricing creativity. We talked about it briefly, but the value of a logo, $200 at Nike versus $1 million at Pepsi. That example right at the beginning of the book, it just got me hooked so deep into it, because the value concept of paying $1 million for a logo just seems really, really high and absurd, quite honestly, until you read on and see the consequences of what happened. So can you kind of take us through that journey a little bit?
Yeah, so the story is Nike in 1971, Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, paid a design student $35 to design the Nike swoosh. Mm-hmm. So that's roughly $200 in today's money. And in 2008, I chose this example because, the Pepsi example, because it was the first example that I was familiar with of a corporation paying $1 million for a logo. So PepsiCo hired a design firm to rebrand the Pepsi, the iconic Pepsi can, basically the logo in the can, $1 million. And so one price is, they're both famous, iconic brands. They're both well designed. One company paid 5,000 times the price.
It's crazy when you say it out loud like that, right?
It's 5,000 times the price. It's so I use it to destroy the myth of selling creativity, in this case, in units of doing, thinking in units of doing. The idea that either of those, that Peter Arnell, who sold the Pepsi logo, the idea that he was charging by the hour is absurd. Of course he wasn't charging by the hour. And Carolyn Davidson, the designer who designed the Nike swoosh, she wasn't charging by the hour either. Maybe she was. I like to ask the question when I talk about this story, do you think $35 was fair, let's call it $200 in today's money, was fair to the designer? And some designers will say, no, that was unfair of Nike. Well,
but I would go back to what the manifesto says and be a professional about it and kind of, not overpriced, but we're running for-profit businesses here.
Yeah.
So we're not running charities. I do have a charity, but that's different. But we should get as much as we can and build profit, because that's the intent and purpose.
But put yourself in the designer's shoes. She's in design school. Mm-hmm. And what's the real value of this logo to her is not the $35 at the time. Yeah. It's in the idea that if this company is at all successful, I'll be able to point to that logo and say, I did it. And so as Nike became more successful, the value to that certainly had to grow. Now, 100%. At some point, there was probably a line that was crossed where maybe there was a bit of resentment. Maybe not. I don't know her. But I'm pretty sure that in the moment when she handed the work over to Phil Knight, the client, and Phil Knight, the client, handed the check over to Carolyn, the designer, I'm pretty sure they both shook hands, they both said thank you, and they both meant it.
Win-win.
Win-win, yeah. And I sometimes ask, do you think it was fair to PepsiCo that the designer charged $1 million? And some designers who tie everything back to hours think that was it's unethical for a designer to charge $1 million for a logo.
Yeah, okay.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. And in the book, the Tropicana example, which is another PepsiCo brand, I talk about that brand because when they redesigned that brand at about the same time, the new brand hits the shelves and sales just plummet. And I extrapolated from that brand and thought, okay, if the Pepsi brand had suffered the same fate after the redesign, what would the cost have been to PepsiCo? And the answer is somewhere between $200 and $500 million, depending on how quickly they could have restored the old packaging, which is what they did with Tropicana. Mm-hmm. So if a redesign can cause $500 million in sales loss, it can probably cause $500 million in sales increase. It's $1 trillion swing in the value of a logo. $1 million in that context is nothing.
Round and error.
Yeah, I think if both designers had read my book, they both would have earned a whole lot more money. So I know designers who work with startup companies who say, well, if you can't pay my fee is this really big number. If you can't pay it, then you pay me a small amount and I'll retain the intellectual property and I will license your logo to you. I know a designer who's done that many, many times.
That's super smart.
Yeah, and you can buy it out at any time, and the buyout price changes as the sales or the value of the company increases. My book is called Pricing Creativity because of the double entendre of pricing creativity, but also the fact that pricing should be a creative act. So you have somebody who sees the value in it but can't afford to pay. We can structure deals in a way that we continue to get paid. I think Peter Arnell could have said, listen, I'll waive half of the $1 million fee, pay me $500,000. Or I'll waive even more. But if sales don't go down, you pay me the $1 million. And if sales go up by 50 million, you pay me another 500,000, etc. He could have built the incentives in.
Pricing at the best, right? And
yeah, that's performance pay, which is a subset of value-based pricing.
I was just on a call with Jay Abraham before we started this, and we were talking about his past history, and he was digging into my model, and it's like, if I was saving people money, they pay me. He's like, I love that. And it's like, now we're on the same team, on the same side of the table, rather than on opposite sides of the table. And that's really one of the biggest...
The incentives are aligned.
And it's a differentiating factor between us and regular CPAs that just care about filling out the box, getting the check sent in, and on to the next one. So they're a cookie-cutter approach, and we're totally opposite side of the spectrum, where we think differently and we are vested in saving the client more money, which is value, right? As opposed to let's just churn out a whole host of numbers and be a volume game.
Accountants are horrible pricers. I was saying to somebody yesterday, all the accountants I've ever worked with, it's like, I need advice, I call them, and I know I'm interrupting them. It's like they don't want to hear from me between tax season, right? Yep. And then I get this bill for the phone call, and there's no logic to it, and it was an inconvenience to them. I was made to feel like I was inconveniencing them. The price was a mystery until the bill shows up. It's just there's so much opportunity for that to be.
And we scrap
better.
all that.
Yeah.
We have a dedicated client support person. There's no nickel and diming on 15-minute increments. My lawyers are the worst for that. Every 15 minutes, I'm getting a $250 bill. And it's like, are you kidding
I used to
me?
bill in the first ad agency I worked in 6-minute increments.
6. All right, that's the worst I've seen.
Yeah.
6-minute increments. That's crazy. Anyway, as we look to wrap up, can you share with people the best place for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm at winwithoutpitching.com is my main website. And I'm Blair Enns on social media, so Twitter and LinkedIn.
Okay, and we'll put the links just below to make life easy for you. So thank you so much for taking the time and sharing some of the key points and the books with us. We'll also put the links to the books below, so do check them out. They have personally helped me transform my business and added so much value to so many with my network as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Casey. It's been great to be here.